Well, thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to talk about how we can use extracurricular activities to help students overcome executive function challenges, which we often see in gifted, 2E, and students with disabilities. And I'd like to thank Sandhya and the Inclusion Collaborative so much for inviting me to speak today. So today, welcome, of course. I'll give you a brief introduction to myself and my background. I'll be kind of briefly defining gifted, profoundly gifted, and twice exceptional, just in case you're not familiar with, twice exceptional. We'll talk about reframing challenges, and we'll talk about executive function challenges you might see in a gifted or twice exceptional child. And then we'll talk about the ways that art, sports, and other extracurriculars can help with lagging executive function skills. And then I'd be happy to have a discussion with you about anything that you thought was interesting. So my background, I come from kind of a three-pronged approach or a three-pronged background. I've been a public school teacher for 23 years. My main thing that I taught was music. And so I've taught preschool music all the way through high school orchestra, marching band, and everything in between, every level, every type of class. So over this number of years, I've taught thousands of students. So you can imagine when I have these classes, my classes tend to be larger than kind of the normal classroom. And of course, I have many neurodivergent children in there. And so, I've spent years accommodating and helping so that we can be inclusive in these programs. But I believe these programs really are helpful for the neurodivergent students as well, and so I'll speak to that in a few minutes. I'm also the mother of three neurodivergent sons. I have three boys, 18, 15, and 12 years old. And the 18-year-old went to college at age 13. And so in May this past year, he actually graduated from college as a 17-year-old with a degree in computer science. And he's now doing his fifth year, which is a master's degree, and he's going to graduate in May with that. And then he's doing an internship with Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena currently. The 15-year-old has autism, and he is at a typical large public high school, doing relatively well, but there are some challenges that go along with that. And then my 12-year-old is also profoundly gifted and has pretty significant dyslexia and then mild ADHD and OCD. So between the three boys in my parenting journey, we had 8 neurodiversities diagnosed in 8 years. So you can imagine that that's a bit of a shock. That's not necessarily what you anticipate. A little bit of a different journey than I expected, and so I'm very empathetic to the experience of parents, and I'm spending a lot of this kind of second half of my career focusing on that. And so clearly, if you have children that have those many neurodiversities, you need to go get a doctorate in cognitive diversity in education. So that is what I've chosen to do. So I'm at Bridges Graduate School of Cognitive Diversity in Education. That's down in Studio City, right outside or part of LA. And that really, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's absolutely teaching how to help students with a variety of neurodiversities and in particular twice exceptionality. So with that said, I have now kind of switched careers. So I taught for 23 years, and in June I resigned from my position. And so I now am the academic director at a private nonprofit startup called 2E for Me Academy. And we currently have 10 students. They're ages 5 to 11, and they are all 2E. And they're, I would say, moderately impacted by their disability, and they're all highly to profoundly gifted. So I work with kindergartners, and we do stuff like the Fibonacci sequence, and then they reproduce that. And then they look for, spirals in nature, and they understand numerically all of what we're talking about. It's pretty amazing. And then we have 11-year-olds who are doing high school math and, that sort of thing. They're doing calculus. So You can imagine, I mean, this is a startup, so I'm still in process of getting this all set academically, but every child has a different every child's in a different place, you know, this is absolutely asynchronicity at its finest. Every child is at a different place from their actual grade level in every subject, just about. So it's an interesting challenge. So I'll talk to you in a year about how that's going. And then I also, this is really near and dear to my heart, is just being an advocate. And so I founded the Bentley Center for resources for gifted and twice exceptional families. And I call myself an educational consultant in neurodiversity. So it really is, hey, does your child have any challenges, or are they amazingly gifted? And you know, either way, or do they have a combination? Um, I can help the path with the parent, and then I can also make referrals for, you know, testing or resources or extracurriculars or whatever in the Orange County area, since I've been here for 20 years and I've used most of them for my own children. So with all of that said, I wanted to just, you know, very briefly talk about gifted and profoundly gifted. First of all, there's no standardized definition, which is very confusing to administrators because if they're trying to set up a program, they don't know what to follow, and I don't blame them. But even researchers can't agree on a definition of these things. I like this. To me, this makes sense, and I've lived with two profoundly gifted children, you know, for a long time. A student who demonstrates exceptional ability, shows greater depth of understanding, or who learns material more quickly than their same age peers. So, yes, they may look kind of amazing in a certain domain, in one or more domains. They may look like everybody else, except they want to do a deep dive even further than everyone else, than peers. Or they start with their peers and their trajectory for learning just skyrockets. So, to me, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, this is an IQ bell curve here. Most gifted for most districts starts maybe at 120, something like that. And then as you go right, somewhere maybe 140 starts the profound giftedness. And really, you can expect that the further right they go on this curve, the more asynchronous they will be, the more, I mean, what we call profoundly gifted. But you know, they act neurodivergent. I mean, at that point, they are different enough that we could put them in the neurodivergent category because they do see the world differently. I mean, it just is different. It's not wrong, it's not bad, it's just different. And so of course, since I'm a music teacher, I love to bring this example of Yo-Yo Ma. And this is him when he was 7 years old. So they were probably already calling him a prodigy back then, I imagine. But he is playing for President John F. Kennedy's birthday at the Kennedy Center. And you'll see that this is only a little 1-minute clip, but you'll see he's accompanied on piano by his older sister, who I think is 11. I just love that for obvious reasons, but I think that's really cool. What I want to say, so in here is Yo-Yo Ma. He's in his 70s now, I think. Um, but what I want to say about him is none of us would debate that he's, you know, profoundly gifted in cello, right? I mean, he's one of the best cellists in the world. And also he's an advocate. He's really for world peace and plays lots of places, I think, for free to bring awareness to that. Um, as a child, he's definitely more advanced than his peers. I mean, he's only 7 years old, and I know other 7-year-olds who play cello, and they don't sound like that. He showed a lot of early maturity in his playing. He's using vibrato, which is where you move your hand back and forth. He's shifting, which is where his left hand was moving up and down. So he's using, and then advanced bow techniques. He developed quickly. He's only been playing for 3 years at this point. So, you know, so even I know other kids who start at 4, but again, they don't sound like this after 7. However, my point with this additionally is, do any of us ask Yo-Yo Ma's IQ? No, we don't ask it. We don't really care, I don't think. And yet we can all agree that he's amazingly talented in what he does and his contributions to the world. And so really to be gifted, it's in one or more areas, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with IQ, and particularly twice exceptional students, many of them don't even test well. And so IQ would not be an accurate measure for them anyway. So I guess I like to show this, but I enjoy thinking about the fact that we don't care about those items. And it's anyway, it's food for thought. So now we get to 2E. So if you're not familiar or you are with twice exceptional, this is kind of the focus of my university program. Dr. Susan Baum is is the chancellor, and she and some other researchers came up with this idea. But this graphic, but twice exceptionality, we have these abilities on one hand, one or more domains. It can be one, does not have to be everything. Versus these complex challenges, again, can be one or more. And as these come together, you know, that idea of yellow plus blue makes green, the abilities and disabilities often mask each other. So the child can actually end up sitting through class looking kind of average. I mean, they're just kind of in the middle of their class, and they don't show a lot of, you know, they don't show amazing abilities, but you can't really see their disabilities either. And an example of this would be my youngest son, who's now 12. He was an older kindergartner because he has a November birthday, but at the end of kindergarten, he was not learning to read. And the school just kept telling me that was age appropriate, but I couldn't imagine. I mean, he wasn't learning at all. It wasn't like he was learning slowly. He was really barely learning. And yet he could go up to the kindergarten teacher and start talking about climate change. You know, he'd be standing up there talking about this. So he's obviously demonstrating some advanced thoughts, right? And he was verbally very precocious. Anyway, so I, of course, as a parent, and you know, had a problem with this. And so I took him and had him privately tested, and they said he is profoundly gifted, but with the discrepancy of his test scores, he also has a disability. And so when you he needed both to be addressed. We weren't addressing his advanced abilities or his disabilities, and he was getting very, very frustrated, and at that point even said he didn't want to live anymore. Can you imagine a 6-year-old saying that? You know, it's hard to believe. And he's a cheerful, friendly, happy kid. I mean, totally out of character to say that. So of course I, you know, had him speak to a counselor, but we immediately addressed his abilities and his disabilities, and I'll tell you more about how that turned out later. But we have to address both from a strength-based, talent-focused perspective. We're looking at what they're interested in and what they're good at, and that's what we're going to hook them with. That's the hook. Let's do the things you're interested in, you're really good at. And by the way, now we can help support the disabilities or the challenges. Again, I love this slide. I always put it up, this one and the next one, when I'm speaking to teachers or parents. So as a teacher, you get your class list at the beginning of the school year. You probably don't know any of the students. You get the list of, okay, these 2 kids have dyslexia. Okay, well, let me think about what dyslexia is. Okay, difficulty with reading and writing and spelling and maybe sequencing. These 4 have ADHD. Okay, those are going to be the kids that are, you know, going crazy around my room. Hyperactive, low frustration tolerance, lack of inhibition. Okay, there's 3 that have autism, and that this is the older term Asperger's, but ASD, social problems, obsessions, difference of imagination. So we get these, and I don't, when we think of it that way, I don't feel like most teachers see that as a positive. I would argue, what if we could take these challenges and we could reframe them as strengths? What if we looked at them as characteristics more than disabilities, or different characteristics, I guess? And I'm not saying these aren't disabilities. I have a child with autism. I know what goes along with that. But I'm also saying there are some parts of their profile that can be used in amazing ways. So dyslexia, 3D thought, visual thought, super creative. ADHD, also super creative. A couple kids I've taught just are hilariously funny. I mean, they were quick-witted, they had lots of energy. If we could focus that energy and that hyper focus on what they're interested in learning and make it a part of your class, that's a huge asset. That is not actually a negative. It's a negative when they're off track doing something else, distracting others. Autism, same thing. They have different ideas. Those might be helpful in, in a brainstorming session, or maybe they're the ones that look at all the ideas everybody else had and are able to see what might work. They're really good often at sequencing. Again, that high concentration for things they're interested in. Well, if we could focus that, if we could get that focused on some things that we want to talk about at school, it actually can be an asset. So dyslexia, so my youngest that we talked about has dyslexia. He is in the subgroup of dyslexics who have that really great 3D visual spatial awareness. So as teachers, you can't assume that all dyslexics have that, but there is a subgroup that have been found to have that. Well, they did tell me that at the time he was tested, but as a 6-year-old, I didn't really know how that was going to play out or why that mattered particularly. But anyway, he decided to be a diver. So he's a competitive diver. And he was standing on the board, so up on the high dive, the 3 meter, and he's backwards and he's on his tiptoes and he's getting ready to do a flip, things none of the rest of us would want to do probably. And he's standing there longer than everybody else. So the other divers pretty much get up there and go. He's standing there for like 40 seconds, which feels like an eternity because he's standing there, that's a long time at a dive meet. Finally, his coaches are getting annoyed with him. I ask him, what are you doing up there? Are you afraid to do the dive? And he said, no, I'm going through the entire process in my mind from my perspective so that I can do my best dive. And so I don't belly flop because it hurts. And so he actually now considers dyslexia to be a superpower. And he'll say that. He'll say he would not give it up if he was asked to. He's done 3 years of Barton training with me, and his reading he now reads at a high school level, so that's come along. And he's also, he's been a nationally ranked diver since he was 10. So he really does use that 3D visual spatial awareness just for the good for himself. And he and I did some research. Greg Louganis also is dyslexic, and his coach believes that there's some others. So I think there probably is a subset of dyslexic divers out there. This book to the left by Dr. Thomas Armstrong, The Power of Neurodiversity, if you're interested in this, what I'm talking about, he actually devotes a chapter to each of these disabilities. And then he includes some mental illness as well. I believe he includes bipolar and schizophrenic, and really talks about the positives of those, or what can come of it, the creativity, or, different things. And so I found that very interesting. So if you're interested in that, that might be a good read. So what is executive function, since that's really what we're here to talk about? Executive function is that, I put it down there in orange, am I doing the right thing at the right time in the right way? So kind of that little boss in your head, right, in the frontal lobe, that's telling you what needs to happen, how you need to do it, what you need to do when it's finished, what you need to do next. That is your executive function. And a lot of students who are twice exceptional and have disabilities have a lot of trouble with this. And I would argue a lot of gifted kids do too, particularly profoundly gifted. Here are some of the things you need them for in school, which unfortunately is practically everything. You need it to maintain focus. You need it to know what to focus on. Should you be focusing on the teachers talking, or on the music playing in the back of the room, or in the kid next to you making sounds, or the friend next to on the other side telling jokes? To plan and organize your behavior. I mean, you need that throughout. I mean, that's just a huge part of school, is being able to get your materials out and, be able to write down homework, and being able to take a test appropriately, or make do a project. Prioritizing information. My middle son often talks about that he just feels like it's just like a fire hose of information coming at him. And I really think, I don't know that he realizes this, but I think he really has a hard time knowing what's important from what the teacher is saying. Which part should I be taking notes on? Because you can't really write down every single thing that your teacher is saying. But I think a more typical kid, is able to understand, well, this is probably going to be on the test, and this joke she told probably isn't, that sort of thing. And so, if you've got the hot fire hose coming at you, that makes it very difficult. It's exhausting. It's exhausting to try to take notes. Controlling their emotions, that's a big thing. And I think some of that does come with age, but also as you get older, if you're in high school having meltdowns, that's going to be a big problem. That's going to be a big social problem. You're going to, there's going to be behavioral intervention. So, that becomes a challenge as you get older. And then initiating working on assignments, just making yourself get started, understanding the process. That's not going to be easy if you have executive function challenges. So am I doing the right thing at the right time in the right way? So here are some particular challenges you might see, again, with gifted, twice exceptional, or children with disabilities. A poor sense of the passage of time. So you might go so far to call, you might have heard of time blindness, and you probably know adults, who are late to everything. My husband would be one of those. But it really is just that it's almost like they don't have the sense of the passage of time. And so if you think about it, if you have a list of 4 assignments to do and you have 30 minutes to work now and an hour to work later, they can't even tell which assignment they might finish in the 30 minutes because they don't understand how long each assignment's going to take. They may think they may just say each one's going to take an hour, and they think they have 4 hours of homework, and so they're just not even going to start it. I think my middle one, does that a lot. And so, that's problematic. If they think they have 4 hours and it's too overwhelming, they're just not going to do any of it. Remembering small details or things that seem unimportant to them. So just because something's important to us as parents or teachers does not mean it's important to them. And I've definitely noticed that if it's not important to them, it somehow does not get remembered, even by those who have really excellent memories in certain ways. Setting goals and incrementally working toward them. With these students, it is like I'm speaking in Greek, excuse me. I mean, the idea of having a project that's due in 2 weeks and knowing how to break it down step by step is just almost unfathomable, depending on the level of the student and how much challenge they have with executive function. Updating and following a calendar. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but I've seen that people with the worst executive function are the ones that don't follow a calendar. And the ones who are most organized are the ones that are using the calendar, which is ironic, except the people who have bad executive function don't really want to deal with a calendar, which is funny. But anyway, it's very difficult. And you can imagine all the things that go on at school, particularly as they get older. By high school, they need to know when their practices are and all of that. Maintaining focus in a distracting environment. We talked about that. And then sensory differences. That can go along with executive function. As they get older, we want them to understand what their sensory differences are and advocate for themselves. If they are just going crazy because of the fluorescent lights above them, or there's a Glade plug-in in the classroom. Man, I go in the room with a Glade plug-in, and there are just some students who cannot deal with that. And I really discourage teachers from having them, but some of them still do. I understand older schoolroom smell, but if the smell is that overwhelming, it's really difficult for certain students to learn. Anyway, they need to be able to manage and advocate as they get older. So how can we improve a 2E gifted, the category, a neurodivergent, shall we say, students' executive function through extracurriculars? Now, I know this is somewhat geared to middle school and high school, but I've taught every level. So I do also teach elementary. Actually, I do that right now. And so really, even for elementary, they're participating in classes at that age, and you can extrapolate this to a dance class or to scouts or to any of those sorts of activities. So I would just call it any activity that doesn't necessarily go on during the school day. And I would argue by using a student's inherent interest in the activity, they are more able to do hard things. We do still want to accommodate them. So I've had parents, ask me, oh, does that mean they don't get accommodated? They just have to suck it up and do it? No, they do still, in some cases, need some accommodation. But if you've ever noticed, neurodivergent children sometimes have more trouble doing what they perceive to be hard things than more typical children. And so I would argue if they're encouraged to do it because of their inherent interest in an activity, they're going to get more practice doing this. And I'll give some examples. So first of all, think of a student who maybe you've seen in his or her IAP, or is your child, has a quote, difficulty focusing on a non-preferred task, or on, just difficulty focusing in general. Imagine that student or your child is doing a preferred activity. They're gaming, they're reading, they're watching TV, something they, of course, want to do, enjoy doing, the first thing they do when they get home, whatever the case it may be. They don't have a focus problem when they're doing these things. They do not have a focus problem. If we're thinking of ADHD, that means they have trouble focusing on what we want them or they want to focus on that's non-preferred, not that they have a focus problem. So in this case, we don't have a focus problem if it's on this sort of thing. Well, now we have school and all the things that we want them to do there. So if we're a small enough group, I was hoping you guys would be open to turning off your, to unmuting and discussing a little bit. We've talked a little bit about executive function skills. And I'm wondering just if in your experience, either being in these activities or having children in these activities, if you can think about how executive function might be impacted when you're in band, choir, theater, stagecraft, sports, dance, swimming, whatever it is. Would you all, if I stop sharing for just a moment, would you guys be willing to unmute? I was just curious. Based on what I've said. There's Jessica. Hi, Jessica.
Hi.
Hi. Do you have any thoughts on, so we're thinking about extracurriculars and it can be anything, karate, whatever. Can you think about how executive function might play a part in something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of those extracurriculars come with keeping track of a lot of extra items, and how to organize those, how to keep track of them in your house, make sure they get from my own daughter gets picked up from after school care by a friend of mine to go to dance class. So it's her having to put her things in her backpack and then take them with her to,
it's a whole thing. Absolutely.
Things are moving everywhere. They're everywhere.
Even getting it washed. Isn't that your favorite? Oh, I need this washed and I need it in an hour.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's all the different schedules, right? And being able to keep track of when they have rehearsals or when they have performances, when they have games, when they have like all those sort of things. And really trying to understand how much time they have to learn something really well when you're doing more of a performative thing, like learning a dance or a theater production, trying to understand that you have a finite amount of time to kind of learn your piece and make sure that you have allotted enough time to practice it, and practice the parts you need to practice, not just the ones you want to practice. that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Those are great, great ideas, Jessica. Tina or Dora, did you have any thoughts? And if you don't, it's no problem. Oh, there's Tina. Hi, Tina.
I'm here.
Did you have any thoughts about extracurriculars? Just what that might involve?
I guess my thought went to the fact that if they're doing something high interest that captures their attention, that gives them those opportunities to practice those executive skills that might be hard to practice in, those lower interest activities.
So that's why we're grabbing what we can, right? We're embracing what they say that they like and saying, what can we're taking advantage of that time, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. And as an extracurricular teacher, I've taught everything I'm about to talk. I've either been in sports, taught music, taught choir, taught all that stuff. I don't know if I thought about 20 years ago how much it was helping the neurodivergent kids, but and I don't know if any of you teach extracurriculars, but I actually think it makes a big difference for them.
Yep.
But anyway, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Dora, should I move on?
I have a question. We have one of the preschoolers, and she was very hygiene and functional, and mom wanted to take it like I think there was a ballet class.
I'm sorry, can you say that part again?
There was a ballet class that she would take it, but
okay.
but a following day there was too much for her. like she will be.
Thank you.
And we tried to ask the mom. She said, well, but I want her to do this. And I tell her, I think it's too much for her, because the following day she will be a meltdown the first thing in the morning to function the whole day.
And that's a great, great point, Dora, that we want to take into account the kids' ages, right? And I do know people who have preschoolers and early elementary that are so overscheduled that they have no downtime. They don't, they barely play with their toys during the week because they're so busy. And you're right, at that point, is it really benefiting? And you notice everything I've said high interest to the child. So it sounds like, I mean, I can't tell for sure, but it sounds like the mom wanted her to take ballet.
Yeah,
And
mom wanted.
right.
And
Well, we all have things we want our kids to do, but we shouldn't, it shouldn't only be about us. We want it to be.
And one day we told us to stay for her not to see her, to see what was, I mean, the behavior that she would do every single day when she would go the following day. And then she said, maybe it's too much for her. And I said, we telling you, maybe it's too much that she doesn't, you want her to do it, but she does not, I mean, for her it's too much.
Right. It's too much, or maybe she doesn't like it. I mean, she's young and she can't articulate that, or maybe she would like it if she tried it a year from now, or if she tried it during the summer when she didn't have school, So I think your evaluation of that, Dora, was probably exactly right. So we definitely want to consider that for sure. If they're overscheduled, they're going to have a hard time enjoying anything. Did my screen come back? Can you guys see it? Hopefully.
Yes.
Okay. So I kind of sat around and thought about this because, as I said, I've taught or been in all of this stuff. So I know. I think, was it Jessica? I think Jessica hit the nail on the head when she said you have to arrive on time, or you have to know your schedule, but you really have to arrive on time for all of this stuff. If you're late, you miss the game, you miss the concert. Marching band, you miss the bus. I mean, and that's really hard for time blind people. I don't know if you've ever thought, if any of you have done marching band, it's just such a visual example that I like to use it. And my middle son is in it, and so he's kind of a good example. He doesn't like to be uncomfortable. I don't know if you've seen that in other neurodivergent students you've worked with, but he doesn't want to be thirsty. He doesn't want to be hot. He doesn't want to be bored. He just, he wants to be able to kind of do his thing. But he wants to be in marching band. He loves music. That is what I would argue is his gift. He's a gifted musician. And so he is willing to stand still for long periods of time in the hot sun carrying a sousaphone, which is 30 pounds. And it is 100 degrees at his school sometimes. And his marching band rehearsal goes for 8 hours. So the fact that he's willing to do that is because he likes music and he likes the marching band, being in the group, and he has friends. That's where his friends are in high school. So if you can imagine, he's carrying a sousaphone while moving synchronously to 40 memorized unmarked spots on a field while playing music. And he's on the spectrum. And actually, the tuba player next to him is also on the spectrum. And there's several others who are chewy that I'm aware of in a pretty small marching band. These kids are willing to do it. They're willing to be uncomfortable. The director does accommodate anyone who really needs it, but for the most part, they're fine. And imagine sustaining attention. We talked about that. They're at a football game playing. There are people shouting. There are cheerleaders going. There are whistles blowing, but if you're watching them march their show, they are very attentive to what they're doing. All of them, all 60 of them. Choir, again, materials, organizing and remembering your music folder. I used to have students who would forget it pretty much constantly. And so my accommodation was they had a school music folder and they had a home music folder so that, we didn't have to arm wrestle about that. Following the director's cues and tolerating the detailed work needed to prepare. When you go to things like festival or you have very, high level performances, you end up playing or singing the same 4 measures over and over again until they are to your director's liking. People who are neurodivergent often have, with things like autism and ADHD, they have trouble with frustration tolerance. Yet they tolerate this because they love to sing and they have friends in the group. Theater and stagecraft. I love thinking about this. They have to follow detailed directions to be a part of a play. They have to perform under pressure. They have to memorize a script. I spoke with a boy at a high school once who was in the play. He was very excited about it, and he had dyslexia. And it took him twice as long as everybody else to memorize the script. But he was willing to do it because he wanted to be in the play and he wanted to act. And I know there are a number of famous actors who have dyslexia. I'm pretty sure Tom Cruise does, but there's a whole list of them. And so he's willing to do it, even though it's twice as hard. Following a fluid schedule. Think of all the kids on the spectrum who are in theater. And they get to the theater and, you know, with autism sometimes comes rigidity. They want to know the schedule and they want it to be a very certain way. You don't get that when you work with a theater person or you work with just even with theater in general. They might have a Saturday schedule and all day long rehearsal, and they might say they're starting with act 1, but then one of the kids doesn't show up. Oh, sorry, guess we got to move to act 2. Oh, the orchestra's not ready. Okay, move on to act 3. I mean, it's fluid. So the fact that these kids are learning to be more fluid and more accepting of schedule changes, I think is so beneficial for that profile of student. And they're willing to do it because they want to be in the theater. Stagecraft, which I don't think I knew what that was previously, but that's the making of all the backdrops of theater. So for plays. So if you have a student who's really artistic or likes to work with tools or likes to build things, that might be a great place for them to work kind of behind the scenes. And I was really disappointed this year at my son's high school. There was another boy on the spectrum who I drive to and from school sometimes, and he was so excited that he was in stagecraft last year as a freshman. And I'm not sure what the problems were, but I think he had trouble following the detailed directions. I imagine, maybe the teacher gave 4 directions in a row and he could only deal with 2. So really, maybe he needed fewer directions at once. And then also, he had challenges remembering, how to be safe with the tools. But by the end of the semester, what he had been so excited about and had a high interest in, the teacher pretty much removed him from the class. And so I was very disappointed to see that because I feel like that was a missed opportunity. And last but not least, think about your sports teams. You want to talk about being physically uncomfortable. When you run until you're, about to throw up, that's physical discomfort. And you know what? You do it because your coach asks you to, because you love the sport and you want to be on the team. Again, you've got multi-step directions. Often they're coming at you during a game with sounds going on everywhere. And if you don't follow the multi-step directions, you're pretty much pulled out of the game. Setting goals. You're preparing over many months for the big game. Remembering equipment, that was mentioned, very important. In high school, I was on the varsity basketball team, and I was so worried I would have the wrong uniform because we had a red uniform and a white uniform. So I just always made sure I had both. But that might not occur to, someone who has a little bit lower executive function than I did. But that might be an accommodation, that's how I accommodated myself. Keep both in there. And then following the schedule. These sports teams have very detailed schedules. So I follow all of these comments with the idea that our students can surprise us with their capabilities when they are doing what they love. And I would argue that these skills can transfer to other areas of life over time. So if we're thinking about as our children get older, then obviously most of us want our children and our students to go to college. We want them to be able to go to college if they want to. And so we think about things like executive function because they're going to have to learn to take care of themselves in college. And so really that idea that they learn by senior year, I'm hopeful my son learns to really be on time for things, which is not his natural inclination because he had to be for marching band, 6 days a week for some months of the year, that when he gets to college, he's going to have that, that neural pathway has been built of, I can get somewhere on time. I can set my alarm. I know that it's important when I'm a part of something. And so I think the idea is that really we're going to have transfer as they get older. And there was some new newish, newish research that I came across that kind of fell in the face of what I always thought was what we should do as parents and teachers. And that was, I thought we were always supposed to tell students that we appreciated the effort and not personalize it, I guess I would say. So if a child was drawing something, you would just say, "Oh, what an amazing picture you're drawing," or "I really like your picture. I like how hard you're working on your picture." Um, and in a negative way, if you were to say, so let's say a child told a lie, you would not call them a liar. You would say, "I'm really disappointed that you lied." So you're not labeling the child. But it turns out on the positive end of it, we actually do want to label our children but in a really positive way. And that is, so we were talking about being on time. Well, maybe my son does start to arrive at things on time his senior year. And now I can say, wow, Will, you're really doing things on time nowadays. You've really got that down. And the idea would be if he starts internalizing that in his mind and he gets to college, then he's like, hey, of course I have to set my alarm. I'm a person who's usually on time. That's cool. Or instead of, I love that you brought your stuff for band class. I'm so glad that you had everything. Alternatively, we could say, wow, you've gotten so responsible as you've gotten older. I just love that you bring your stuff. Now, in his mind, we're starting to think, okay, I'm a responsible person who brings my stuff. Or I'm a goal-oriented person. I don't just do goal-oriented things. I'm actually a goal-oriented person. So that's going to help me set goals as I get older. So I thought that was interesting. So on the negative side, of course, you do not want to label your children or your students, but on the positive, when we do some of these labels, it actually can help with the carryover with the executive function as they get older. So I found that to be an interesting point. So I wanted to thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I would love to hear any questions or comments. And I did want to see, these are my resources, and I did want to share that I have a book that's being published. It's not on anything I talked about today. Here's the cover right here, using picture books to help little ones learn about themselves. And so that'll be out, I think, in November, and it should be on Amazon. Anyway, just as an aside. But does anyone have questions or just even comments about what we talked about?
I think being an open-minded, that's what we have to, like you were saying, it's for each child that we have to individualize them.
Yes.
Never.
It seems like more and more individualization is really what these kids need, right? They have different abilities and talents and interests and disabilities. Yeah, and that starts at the preschool level. I mean, I've taught preschool.
And the most important thing, it's as a professionals, we need to be open to learn in a different way for the kids to learn. Like you said, if we want to do something, but the kids is not learning, we have to find a way that they learn, that we can implement it, and it doesn't help only that child, it helps everybody, because like in the morning that we were talking about, that it's everybody have any kind of disability.
Yes, absolutely. I remember just thinking about, I mean, I'm teaching 5-year-olds now, so that's not far from preschool, but just that idea, if you're trying to get a child to fill out, and I know it's a little crazy, but sometimes they do worksheets and stuff in preschool, not advocating that, but I'm just saying, I know it happens. But the child won't fill out, the worksheet, or won't do the letters or whatever, the numbers or the counting or whatever, but the child loves dinosaurs. Okay, well, now the kid gets a dinosaur worksheet, or maybe everybody gets a dinosaur worksheet the next day. And I imagine he'll be a little more jazzed about doing that, or even part of it, if it's something in his interest. So really, you could almost take a survey of the interests of the kids in your preschool class and mix it up. And if there's someone who loves Dora the Explorer, then you have a Dora the Explorer worksheet, or whatever activities, whatever it is you're doing. So that would work really well in a preschool. Anyone else? Tina or Jessica?
Just say it's a reminder to myself to keep advocating for tying in those high interest activities, especially at school, to increase engagement, work on those skills, and then especially in my work, reduce behaviors that come from frustration and lack of interest oftentimes.
Oh, that's exactly what I was going to say is teachers get nervous about differentiating and individualizing because it seems like it takes too much time. And, you know, I'm a teacher, I get it for sure. But guess what? The kid that's usually messing around in the back of the room, if you can help him be interested, a lot of the behaviors will go away, which as a psychologist, I'm sure that's what you work with a lot.
Yeah, try my best.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi. Yeah, I agree with Tina. I feel like there were a lot of really great key reminders that I wrote down for myself too to share with my staff. Just about remaining strength-based and talent-focused, or you know, we always make sure we don't label students for the, you know, unexpected behaviors that they show sometimes, but the reminder that we should be labeling them for the positives and the growth that they're making, like yeah, like, oh, you're so responsible now, as opposed to just like, that was a responsible choice. Like, no, you are responsible. You're a responsible person. And here's why. So yeah, just really good reminders about kind of how to enforce that, you know, daily and quickly with our kids as well, on top of the hard work of making it more interest-based and differentiated for students, but even just the little nuggets that we can make sure we're doing on a daily basis. So thank you for that.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks, guys, for coming. I really appreciate it.